Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into what is honestly the ultimate geopolitical boss fight shaping the Asian century. We are talking about India's massive and, let's face it, sometimes incredibly frustrating quest to connect with Central Asia. If you follow global trade, the future of tech outsourcing, or just how modern superpowers are built from the ground up, this absolutely matters to you. It is a wild story filled with ancient empires, colonial walls, and some really clever modern strategies designed to completely bypass physical geography.
So let's jump right into the massive question at the heart of all this, because it's the central dilemma restricting India's rise in its own extended neighborhood. Imagine you've got India, this emerging giant looking to expand its influence, and right next door is Central Asia, a region that is just rich in resources and strategic importance. It's kind of like trying to visit a neighbor whose yard is full of things you desperately need, but there's a massive, impenetrable brick wall sitting right on the property line. How exactly do you solve that?
Here is our roadmap for today to see how India is trying to do just that. We'll cover the geographic barrier, echoes of ancient empires, the colonial decoupling, looking north, a false start, and finally, connecting Central Asia.
Section 1. The geographic barrier. Okay, here's the crucial thing you need to know first. India and Central Asia actually occupy a shared strategic space. It makes total logical sense for them to be deeply integrated, especially because Central Asia is an absolute goldmine of energy resources that are absolutely critical for fueling India's booming economic engine. But India's outreach is heavily constrained by a very real, very physical geopolitical barrier, and that's Pakistan. New Delhi is quite literally walled off by land, and because of this geographic reality, India is forced to constantly seek out alternative, sometimes pretty convoluted ways to get any kind of strategic foothold in the region.
Section 2. Echoes of Ancient Empires. Now, what's really fascinating here is that this region wasn't always walled off. When we look at this timeline, you can clearly see a deep historical exchange of goods, ideas, and religions. I mean, think about the ancient Silk Road. It wasn't just about trading silk, right? It was a superhighway for the spread of knowledge and culture. Buddhism traveled out of India right up through Central Asia. Those massive Bamiyan Buddhas erected in Afghanistan back in the 6th century are a perfect physical testament to that shared heritage. Over the centuries, you had vast polities like the Kushan Empire and eventually the Mughal Empire in the 16th century, which physically connected Central Eurasia and South Asia into one massive shared space.
Of course, history is always viewed through different modern lenses. Our source materials carefully point out two very contrasting views on this deeply intertwined history. On one hand, many view the centuries of Mughal rule as the creation of a contiguous cultural space, something that brought these regions into a highly creative interaction. On the flip side, contemporary Hindu nationalist perspectives view the Muslim conquest from the north as a period of devastation for India's pre-Islamic culture. But regardless of which lens you look through, the historical reality remains exactly the same. These two regions were deeply, physically connected for centuries.
Section 3. The colonial decoupling.
So how did they get so separated? Well, the colonial era comes along and interjects a completely new, disruptive strategy. You've got British Viceroy Lord Curzon, and he wasn't trying to unite the regions like the empires of old. Not at all. He championed what was called a forward foreign policy. With a few strokes of a pen in London, his goals shifted away from cultural exchange. He wanted to project hard power northward to counter the southward advances of Tsarist Russia. He effectively converted Afghanistan into a British protectorate, a deliberate, manufactured buffer state.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates the true origin of the geographic barrier we see today. British policies intentionally decoupled Central Eurasia and South Asia just to protect their colonial interests. South Asia was locked down as the jewel of the British Empire, Central Eurasia was totally absorbed by the Russians, and Afghanistan was wedged right in between as the buffer. The ancient Silk Road ties, they were completely severed.
Section 4. Looking north. A false start.
Fast forward with me to the 1990s, and we get India's first major attempt to bypass that wall, the Look North policy. The Cold War is over, the Central Asian republics are newly independent, and India sees a major opening. Their strategy was to establish a foothold by offering India up as a role model, a secular, democratic, multicultural polity that these brand new post-Soviet states could emulate. And, let's be totally honest here, India was highly motivated by the massive hydrocarbon reserves sitting there just waiting to fuel its booming economy.
In 1995, Prime Minister Narasimha Rao kicked off this massive charm offensive. He pitched India as the ideal, non-threatening partner, publicly stating that India had no selfish motives. It was a classic soft power push aimed at building regional trust. But behind the scenes,
there was a much harder strategic calculus going on. According to Indian strategic perceptions detailed in our source text, the Look North policy was explicitly designed as a non-Pakistani alternative. Pakistan at the time was looking for a strategic depth in the region, actively supporting Islamic fundamentalism and groups like the Mujahideen during conflicts like the Tajik Civil War. India's goal was to directly counter this by consolidating secular democracies as a literal bulwark against that exact religious extremism.
And for a brief, shining moment, this strategy actually yielded a very rare and significant military foothold. India provided material and logistical support to the anti-Taliban Northern Alliance, and they offered long-term military training to Tajikistan. In return, New Delhi actually managed to secure exclusive access to the Aini Air Base in Tajikistan. It genuinely seemed like the Look North policy was working.
But at the end of the day, you just can't escape geography. You can't magically trade goods through a massive mountain range locked down by a rival. Despite getting that airbase, bilateral trade remained incredibly low. The stark reality was that Central Asia was still heavily entrenched in the Russian sphere of influence, and New Delhi was plagued by a lot of strategic ambiguity. Ultimately, the physical barrier of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir meant land routes for trade were totally blocked. India was forced to admit the Look North policy was a false start.
Section 5. Connecting Central Asia.
Recognizing that their previous approach was essentially a dead end, and openly acknowledging their latecomer status in the region compared to heavyweights like China and Russia, New Delhi pivoted hard. In 2012, they unveiled the Connect Central Asia policy. Instead of fighting a losing battle over dirt and land borders, their new aim was to carve out space through targeted modern cooperation.
They decided to build an entirely new kind of Silk Road, one made of fiber optics and human capital instead of asphalt. By offering highly sought-after IT dominance, medical tourism, granting priority access for Central Asian students to Indian universities, and providing specialized military training, they are literally bypassing a physical mountain range with a digital and cultural web. They are bridging that massive gap through human and technological connections. As this explainer reveals, the physical wall erected over a century ago, it remains firmly in place. Lord Curzon's buffer essentially still exists on the ground. But all of this leaves us with the ultimate 21st century question. In an era of fiber optics, digital connectivity, and soft power, does physical geography even matter anymore? Thanks so much for joining this explainer. Keep questioning the map.